shortly. Hi, everybody, again. Thank you so much for making the time. I must say we were really over the moon with our first session on Tuesday. So we're going to kick right into gear again with a second session with Mr. McLevin Mackey-Tross on sustainable agriculture. In the meantime, for those of you who, again, most of you have, but for those of you who have not changed to your full names, please just keep in mind to change to your full names, as we will be taking attendance at 6:20. Okay. So with that being said, I know you have a million questions and you're probably looking forward to this second session. So I'll hand the floor over to Mr. Mackey-Tross. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. I just want to say welcome to each and every one of you. And thanks for joining us. I know that your time is precious, so being here really tells me that we're willing to share our experiences and learn as much as possible. Just give me a minute while I'm trying to get a full screen here, Caitlin.
Sure, and also if you want me to control it, Mackie, I have your back.
Okay. Let me start, and then I think I can have you do that for me. It would be a little bit easier, as men don't multitask as well as women do. So,
Good.
sure, thanks for that.
No problem.
Yeah. So once again, welcome, guys. And the last session was a very lively session, and we had some homework to do. Well, I had some homework to do because I was really ill-informed on the GMO. I really haven't paid much attention to it. Since the last class, I'd promised to do some research, and I did. And the question was raised about GMO seeds. When you plant the seeds, what happens? Now, what happened when you plant the seed is that the seed, well, let me back up a little bit. GMO is really altering the genes of the plant. And so basically this is done by what they call tissue culture. It's done in a lab environment. So they're playing with the genetics, the genes of the plant. So they're altering the genes of the plant. Now, once that is done, the plant is grown by tissue culture. And that plant now matures and have different characteristics to the plant that the genes really came from before, because they're modifying the actual structure of the plant. So what ensues now, the plant grows and it bears fruit, and that fruit has seeds in it. Now, when you plant that seed would definitely grow, and it would have the characteristics of the new genes that were inputted into the plant before. So it would be a true replica of the plant that was genetically modified. So I just want to stand corrected on last week. And so we should understand that the seed will grow, and the seed will have all of the new traits or characteristics of the plant that it came from. And so it would repeat itself and so on. And maybe later on, they would take a new seed and take genes from it and do the same thing and just alter it a little bit as well. Now, it's very interesting, and that is a topic in itself. That is a course of study in itself. And I could remember having some interest in the tissue culture a few years ago, but the thing is, there's no place that I've come across to date in the Caribbean that does lectures or Caitlin, we were looking into that sometime. And I think that we found a place in Texas that were doing tissue culture, but nothing in our region. But that's a very interesting topic in itself, and it's very in-depth. Gets into a lot of the science itself of the plant. People with agronomy background who really studied agriculture in depth would have a better understanding than I would. But if you guys have a chance, you could do your own research on GMOs or genetically modified organisms, or GE, genetically engineered plants. All right, so that was from the last session. Now, this session, we're going to focus our attention on water. And really, let me get some drops happening here. That's right. Really, we take water for granted. We grew up with water. Water is basically free. We could debate that because some would say, yes, but I have to pay my water bill. Sure. What, in a sense, what you're paying for is a distribution of water, and we will get into that a little bit later. When we're in fall, you could catch the water, and they use some fancy terms with that, water harvesting and storing. And so the people who lives in the hill, the water is free. One would argue, yes, in the city, you would have to pay for your water, yes, because you don't catch the water when it rains and so on. But water on a whole is a very scarce commodity. Scarce in one sense and plentiful in the other sense. Because when we look around, we see that we are surrounded by the sea. And so that is a lot of water. And if you say a lot again, it's still more water. But what happens is that water in its present state is no use to us. Yes, the fish and the sharks and so on, like that kind of water. But we as humans, and by extension, animals and so on, that water is no real immediate use to us because of the salt content. Now, there's a process that is called desalination or reverse osmosis. And we can definitely turn that water into fresh water and use it, but that becomes very expensive. All right, so that's my little epilogue and introduction to what we're doing here tonight. In terms of water, I'm going to look at different aspects of water, and I won't really bore you with all of the different topics up front, but as we go along, we will divulge into them. Keithlin, if you're with me, we could go to the other slide.
Sure. Just give me a. We're ready.
Okay, good. Thank you much. Now, water. Yes. We all probably have kids, younger siblings that are in school. So let us all pretend that we're in grade school or helping our kids or nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters with a little science homework. And so when we read, we see that the water is organic, it is transparent, it's tasteless, it's odorless, and it's almost colorless. Now, water is a chemical substance. We really don't think of it as being a chemical. Water is a chemical. And the chemical composition is H2O, meaning 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen. When combined, that's the chemical structure that forms water. Now, this is the main constituent of the Earth's hydrosphere, and fluids of all known living organisms. So once something is alive, whether it be plants, organisms, humans, animals, that living thing is comprised of water. And when we look at it, it's comprised of the majority of that mass is water. For example, human body is said to be around 70% water. And so we see how important water is from this onset. I just want to drill that in. Water is vital to all known forms of life, despite providing either food, energy, or organic micronutrients. We went through the chemical formula already. Let me point out here, and a lot of people don't think of it this way, but the amount of water in the world doesn't change. Water is a finite resource, meaning it cannot be created or destroyed. Let me go over that again. Water is a finite resource. It cannot be created or destroyed. What happens here is that water just changes its state from solid to liquid to gas, back to liquid to solid, back to, just changes from one state to the next. But the amount of water really doesn't change. We would realize that, okay, we put the kettle on in the morning, we put water in the kettle, and the kettle starts to whistle. But our ladies like to do multiple things at the same time. So you might be cooking, you might be maybe in your little backyard garden looking some seasoning for the pot that you're trying to cook some lunch. By the time you get back, yes, half the water in the kettle has disappeared. Yes, it's not in the kettle, but it's not lost anywhere. It's just changed, the water just changed its state. So what is not in the kettle has evaporated into a gas, and then it will definitely condense again back into liquid form. Okay, so the water just doesn't disappear. Water cannot be created or you can't destroy it. Next slide, Keithlin. Some facts about water. Water is the most precious resource on the planet. And one can argue, well, air is, and so on. But for the purpose of this exercise, water is the most precious resource on the planet. Water as a commodity is used in every living thing. Since the beginning of time, the earth water has remained the same, like I said before. And the water cycle, you will hear people talk about the water cycle. It just means that the water changes state and that cycle continues over and over and over again, infinite. Okay? These are facts about water. So about 97.5, and some people say 97.5% of the water on the earth is salt water. And just by the nature of the salt content, it cannot be used in its present state for domestic purposes. You can't even water your plants with it because the salt content would definitely ruin the plants. So that leave us with about 2.5% of fresh water. Listen to this very carefully. 1.5% of that fresh water is hidden in the Polaris, which is the North and the South Pole. So in a sense, we're left with 1% of fresh water that is available for human consumption. Okay? So just try to wrap your minds around it. And here where I'm going with this. I'm trying to show all of us how precious the water resource or the fresh water is and how limited it is. Now, yes, we would realize that according to the World Health Organization, it's just a fraction of the world's water is safe for consumption. And this is shared by more than 7 billion people worldwide. And I think if we are to go with the predictions from the same WHO, by 2050, we'd be looking at more than doubling. We'd be looking at about 10 billion people worldwide. So the amount of fresh water will remain the same. And now what happens is that we would have a greater demand because we'll have more people and more industries and more agriculture production. So yes, we would have more demand for that finite amount of fresh water that is available to us. Okay. Let's look at the distribution of the water on the earth. Ethan, is it possible for us to minimize the right screen?
Is that better?
No. Maybe it's from my end. Let me see. Where I'm seeing myself on the right and a few others. How do I get?
At the very top, there's 4 icons where you would see yourself. Choose the icon that looks like a dash, that looks like a underscore. And it will minimize you and the others that you're seeing.
I see view at the right, at the top right. Let's see.
So do you see the 4 icons at the top left?
Top left. No, I'm seeing on the top left. No.
Okay, it depends on the view. Are you in gallery view? Can you tell?
No, I can't. Okay, let me see. Exit full screen. Sorry, view. Full screen.
Yeah, because what you can do, you can open up your presentation and we won't see it, and you can follow through your presentation and you can minimize Zoom.
No, this would work better for me. Okay, let me just. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, let's proceed. The distribution of water on the earth, on the planet. And I alluded to it earlier, but I wanted to show you graphically so you could have a better appreciation of what we speak. Now, the earth is made up of water and land. And 70% of the earth is water, leaving 30% as land. Now, that water itself, remember I said the majority of it is salt water? So some schools of thought is 97 and some is 97.5, but for all intents purposes, let's work with 97. So the saltwater content of that whole body of that makes up the earth is 97%. So that leaves us with just 3% of fresh water. Now, the fresh water, we could break that down into the ice caps and glaciers. That's basically the North and South Pole. We're talking 68.7% of that just that 3% of that total fresh water. So of the total fresh water, about 68.7% is ice and is not available to us. The groundwater that is used a lot is about 30%. And then we have just a little bit, which is 0.3%, which is surface water. And later on, you'll see when we divulge a little further how we would break down these different sources of water. So of the surface water, the lakes, the Great Lakes and so on, about 87%. We got swamps, about 11%. And believe it or not, the rivers are only 2% of the surface water, which is the fresh water. Let's go to the next slide, Caitlin. Okay. I just show this inside here since we're talking about the distribution of water and the composition of water so that we could have an appreciation. Now, on the world average, this is how the usage goes. Farming and related areas, irrigation and all of that. It's about 70% of the fresh water that is used in the world. Industries, factories, paper mills and all and such, it's 25%. And only 5% is used for domestic purposes. Now let's bring it closer home to St. Kitts and Nevis. And we would see the exact opposite down here. What is interesting is that there's hardly any water in St. Kitts and Nevis that is allocated for farming. Most of the water, approximately 80% of the water, is for domestic use. Households, hotels, restaurants, that kind of stuff. So we have a lot to do in terms of water allocation and water usage if we're to grow our farming industry. Because we know that farming cannot be successful without adequate water, fresh water and clean water. And so you see that compared to the world averages and the industrialized countries, we're really doing the opposite. We are only allocating about 5 to 10% of our fresh water for farming. And I don't even, it's really not even allocated. We're using 5 to 10% of the fresh water for farming. So in St. Kitts, for example, I did some work for FAO and did a field trip and was really taken aback that most of the farms, especially those ones in the hills, there's no water, so to speak. I didn't see any catchments, and there's no good water coming from the normal water sources. So that is a real problem. Okay. In Nevis, it's a little bit different because the demographics are different. We usually farm in residential areas, and so we're able to tap into the public or the government mains more often than not. But it's the reverse in St. Kitts because most of the houses are clustered together on the lower lying lands, and the people with backyard would have access to fresh water, but the people with the bigger farms definitely have a problem, and that needs to be addressed like yesterday. Next slide, please. So we talk about sources of water. And what do we mean by sources of water? Well, we're talking about the different bodies of water, such as rivers, streams, lakes, reservoirs, springs, groundwater. Note well, what we're talking here about is fresh water because the salt water for our purposes is useless. We can't use the salt water for domestic purposes or farming enterprises. We can't drink that water, and we definitely can't feed that water to our animals and plants. We spoke earlier about surface water, and surface water we talk about the lakes and the rivers and springs and so on. Well, not springs, because the spring would definitely come under groundwater. And we hear a lot about aquifers. Now, what are aquifers? Aquifers are spaces beneath the Earth's surface, between the rocks, that holds large amounts of water. In Bastia, for example, there's a great big aquifer that runs, I think it runs around the Bird Rock region, come right down into Bastia. And so we have to be careful with some of the runoffs that goes into the ground, because they can contaminate our aquifers or groundwater. Now, we talk about recycled water as well. And this water is probably coming from our kitchen sinks, our showers, our laundry. And sometimes what happens, especially at the hotels, is that they recycle this water, they treat it, and they send it back onto the Gulf Coast and for watering plants, etc. So that is gray water that water is not potable, is not good for drinking or other domestic uses. Next slide. So we must pay attention to water quality. Water quality really refers to the chemical, physical, and biological characteristics of the water. It is a measure of the condition of the water relative to the requirements of one or more biotic species or to any human needs or purpose. Now, we're really concerned about good, clean water here, because if the water is contaminated, we know what can happen. So water quality is one of the most important factors when we're talking about a healthy ecosystem. Clean water supports a diversity of plants and wildlife. Water quality plays an important role in crop growth, pesticide efficacy, and the well-being of livestock and humans. Poor water quality can result in contaminated produce, as well as various diseases in both animals and mankind. It must be a collaborated effort between the government and the agriculture department and the agricultural producers to minimize the water quality issues by using the best management practices and good agricultural practices, GAP. Clean and plentiful water supply is essential for productive agriculture to supply the public with adequate food and fiber. But agriculture, like other land uses, can sometimes negatively affect the water quality, and we would see how that is affected in just a minute. But before that, let's look at some of the common causes of poor water quality. Soil erosion, manure runoff, over application of fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, and organic fertilizers alike, pollutants, and excessive chemicals in the water. So we were talking about runoff. Soil erosion, manure runoff, over application of fertilizer, pollutants, excess phosphorus can pollute streams, rivers, lakes, the aquifers, and may contaminate groundwater with nitrates and other chemicals. They can also harm the drinking water supplies, the aquatic ecosystems, and the recreational uses of water bodies. Increasing competition from other sectors of society impacts the availability of clean water. Like I said before, the water is finite. There's no creation of water, new creation of water. What we have is what we have. So it's just a matter of making the best use of it. And that is one of the points I'm trying to drive home here tonight. Towns, industries, and the natural environment all have claims to the available water. So everybody is competing for fresh water because it's limited. And the droughts make it even more precious a commodity. Crops, livestock, and poultry operations require adequate water for on-farm uses. So we must have adequate, clean water on the farms, whether it be crop farming, livestock, or agro-processing. We must have adequate water and clean water to boot. Next slide. So sometimes we get into a crisis situation. And I use the term lightly, but water is so critical that when we don't have it, yes, it seems like a crisis. Overpopulation and the increasing demand for water. That is something that is, well, it really needs addressing. Because, yes, we hear the politicians talk about desalination and so on, but the reality is that desal is very, very expensive because of the cost of electricity, and you need electricity to, in short, turn the salt water into fresh water, remove the impurities from the salt water so that it becomes potable water. So it's a very expensive process. Droughts and other severe weather events caused by climate change. Now, climate change is a real phenomenon, and that has changed the way that we do a lot of things, change the way that we farm, change the way that, or change the weather patterns and everything. I could recall, and I'm sure you can too, when you were growing up, going primary school, high school, in the rainy seasons, the guts used to run almost on a weekly basis. Now, if we get 3 or 4 gut runs per year, we get a lot. So the climate and the amount of rainfall has been changing here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and I could say throughout the region as well. Now, there's a lot of wastage of water, and sometimes we're all guilty of wasting water, but I'm talking about wasting water on a large scale. Sometimes we see government mains ruptured, and it takes hours, sometimes days, before it's fixed. So we need to do much better than that in terms of not wasting the water. Now, deforestation plays a part, but here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we really don't have any big forests and so on. So we're not too concerned about that. That is more for industrialized countries of the world. And the same with industrialization, but I thought I should put it in there to just bring it to your attention, because the industries consume a lot of water. The paper industry, for example, 1 ton of paper is something like 2,500 gallons of water that is being used or more. So I just put it in there so that we have a pretty good understanding of where and who uses the majority of water and what is it, you know, and also give you an appreciation for they need to conserve water. Next slide. So we really get into the meat of the matter now. Gave you some background, and we talk on the onset about water as a resource and the management of the water resource. So water has to be managed properly. And therefore, water resource management is the activity of planning, developing, distributing, and managing the optimum use of the water resource that we have. So after tonight, I think we should all be a little bit more conscious not to waste the water. So the management now of the water is very, very important. And sometimes this is bigger than us. It's at the water department level, at the government level, at the state level. And it is really the movement of water in a controlled manner from one place to another without causing any harm or danger to humans, livestock, infrastructure, and the environment. So the management of the resource, because remember, the water might be in reservoirs, it might be stored in large tanks, and we have to get the water to people no matter where they live. So the resource, the management of the water is basically moving the water from one place to another. But while doing so, you can't cause any harm to anybody. And anybody extend to livestock, then we have to take the physical infrastructure, and damage to the environment as well has to be in the whole mix and in the whole equation. Next slide. So we're going to spend a minute and look at the importance of the management of the water. We have a supply and demand issue happening here. And we have just about 7 billion people worldwide. We could break it down into the St. Kitts Nevis context. We have close to 50,000 people, and our population is growing. And it was established before, there's no new water. The water is the same. So when we talk about new water, what we're talking about, we have the same wells, we have the same aquifers, and so on. So what we would have to do later on, as you would see, once we get a little bit deeper, is to start to collect our water. So the water as a commodity, as a resource, is becoming scarce. And we need to optimize its use. We don't need to waste it anymore. We need to distribute the water equitably to various sectors of the economy so that all sectors can function at their full potential. Remember earlier on, we said, okay, the hotels need water, the farms need water, the businesses need water, but we have to do this so that everybody get an adequate amount. So it has to be distributed equitably. And therefore, that is where the management of the water comes into play. Someone from St. Kitts, tell me what the water department mantra in St. Kitts is, please. In Nevis is the mantra there is water for life, and that is plastered all over their vehicles. Water for life, water is life, sorry. What ensues in St. Kitts? What do they say in St. Kitts? Nothing? Water is life as well? Okay, beautiful. And so that just signifies how important water is. It is significant since life cannot survive without it. I could recall last class we were talking about soil and healthy soil and everything depends on the soil. Well, there's no survival without water. So everything depends on water as well. So we're seeing the connection with water and we're seeing the connection with the soil, and we'll all put it together later on to say, well, listen, if there's no agriculture, there's no life either. All right? So some areas do not have running water, and we consider them to be off the grid. When we say off the grid, it's just like the water grid. Some people don't have electricity, and we say they're not connected to the grid. So when you hear those terms, that is what we're talking about. So harvesting and storage of water is very, very critical, especially more so for those people who are considered to be off the grid. Now, I hasten to add that it might be just as critical for us who are connected to the grid, because just, I think, might be a little bit of ease right now, but last month, there was water shedding in both St. Kitts and Nevis. And I know in St. Kitts, that has been going on for some time. So what I'm saying here is that although some of us might be connected to the grid, if we do not make a conscious effort to harvest and store water, we can be just as badly off as those who are not connected to the grid. And I hope I'm reaching everybody by putting it that way. We need to move water from place to place so that we can distribute the water to as many people as possible, no matter their geographic location on the island, whether they're up in the hills, whether they're living on the coastline, or wherever. This is part of the management process. And if I've said it before, I just wanted to reiterate such that I drive these points home because they're very, very critical in the big scheme of things. It is a means of collecting water for drinking and other purposes such as sanitation. So the water harvesting, I can't stress enough, and I'll say it again, is very important. Okay, we'll get to how we do that a little bit later on, but just start to wrap your minds around that portion of it. Next slide. One may ask themselves why plants need water. And just tap again, Caitlin. Yeah. So, yes, an effective water management system is essential for crops as well. If we are to attain the full potential of the crop, if we are to maximize the yield, get optimal root development, maximize the plant strength, and maximize nutrient uptake, we must have adequate clean water to do so. And I would stress again, adequate clean water. The water must be clean, free of contaminants. Be mindful. A lot of us, even those of us in our backyards, who doing a little gardening and so on, we tend to think the plant is not growing fast enough. So we need to add some fertilizer. Maybe not a bad idea, but if we don't have adequate water, adding the fertilizer will probably do more harm than good. Now, reason being is that the plant needs adequate water to dissolve that fertilizer, whether it's organic fertilizer or chemical fertilizer. That fertilizer must be dissolved and then be so that the plants can uptake it. The plant can't uptake the fertilizer unless it's converted to nutrients in a soluble state. So we need the water, and we need adequate water in the root zone for the plants to be able to uptake the nutrients. Next slide. Might be a rhetorical question, but animals too need water. And the importance of water to animals can be summarized as follows. Just like humans, water is important in the digestion of food and feed. It is used in homeostasis in animals. That is just a fancy way of saying that it's stabilizing the internal environment of the animal. It is required for cooling down the body temperature, especially on very hot days. If we ever see a cattle in the pasture and the cattle go to drink water on a very hot day, the cattle might drink in excess of 20 gallons of water in any one shot. And so, yes, it is important that we have adequate water for animal consumption. It is vital for the fecal excretion, for the animals to pass their waste and stuff like that. They must consume adequate water. It is required for metabolic reactions in the animal's body. It is required especially in milk and egg production processes. If any of us have chickens, we would know that if our chickens don't get adequate water, then the egg production drops off dramatically. By starving the chickens one day, you may starve yourself 4 or 5 days without them producing an egg. That is how serious it is. In terms of milk production, it's the same thing. The cows don't get adequate water, then they don't produce milk as they should at all. So we have to be very mindful that our animals need adequate water for their sustenance all the time. Next slide. Now, I think this would come up more in the discussion and the conversation we would have after the lecture, really. What watering methods do we use on our farm, and which one is most beneficial in terms of water conservation and maximizing the use of the resource? But let's look at it briefly. Next slide. I put some of them up on the screen. We have the misting, where it's a light spray. Sorry. Usually that is done in shade houses, greenhouses. Those of us who would travel to Florida from time to time would see some misting done on the patios and so on, just to cool the place down. So the misting works twofold, really. It cools the area and it provides some moisture to the plants. Now, in our picture on the right, we see the watering can. And for a lot of us in the backyard, we still do the watering can because it's a little bit better than using the hose, but it's still not ideal. We talk about bottom watering, and excuse me for the language, but basically what we're saying here is that we're, especially for seedlings, we're submersing the seedlings, and I showed you that one last class, we're immersing the seedlings in in a body of water. And so what happens is that by way of osmosis, the seedlings absorb the water from the bottom up. And that is a very, very good way, because a lot of times what happens is that when you water from overhead, you leave the leaves stay wet, and that usually attracts pathogens and fungi and so on. Now, I've seen some innovations, and kudos to those who does it. They get some gallon bottle, fill them up with water, and put some little pinholes in them so that the water drips very, very slowly and penetrates the soil and get right down into the root zone. And I've seen it done with potted plants, and I've seen it done open as well, with just in the garden. And that is a lot more effective than taking the water hose and shooting water. Now, right to the bottom, you see the plant, the seedling is there, and you see the hose and the drip line. And that is the ideal way to water. And we will explain a little bit more of that. Caitlin, if you could bring me up on the screen full, I could, yeah, okay. I have some little aids with me here. And is everybody seeing my hand at all? Anybody seeing this?
Yes.
Okay, this is what we call an emitter. And basically what happens is that this go into the drip line, and then let's bear with me for a second.
You
The
may
drip,
probably want to either lower your screen or
yeah, like that, okay. The
Yep.
drip line attaches a microtube into it. Something like this. Okay. And then to the end of it, we have the drip peg. And this drip peg goes to the plant root and therefore delivers water right to the plant root. So if this is the root of the plant, the drip peg goes right here, so that no water is wasted. It goes right to the root zone where the water is needed most. Okay? Thanks. Now, some other methods, and I think I've got a slide there, but since I've got the aids here, I will show you. This is watering for the chickens, for the birds. Okay? The birds would just click on here, water would come down, and then they would just pick it up, really. This one is a pig valve. So those of us who do a little pork farming, what we're doing is we're introducing these pig valves into the pens so that the pig would come and just bite on this. And once it bites on this, the water would spoosh out and goes right into the pig's mouth. So what these does is that they cut down on the water wastage, and it provides water there 24/7. Whenever the pig feels like it could drink some water, it's right there, it's available. Let me see if there's anything else. I think these will come out more in the field trip, but these are just some of the irrigation gadgets, shut-off valves, and so on that we use in the drip irrigation. Okay, let's go back to the screen, Kipling, please. Thank you. Right, so what we're trying to do here is show you some of the gadgets that should be incorporated on your farms, in your backyards, to minimize the wastage of water and to better utilize the consumption of water. On the top left, that's a traditional water trough for cows in a pasture. There would be a pipe that would lead right into that trough so that there's water there constantly. There's a bucket system. There's a tire system for pigs. But of course, you could see that one, there would be some wastage. There's the bird nipple valve for the chickens. Down to the bottom right, I just showed you the pig valve. And how many of you realize that this is what they call a sugar kettle? Growing up, that was always a copper for me. So the sugar kettle is another way of storing water. I still see some of them around here in Nevis. And then we see the pig in action right there. So these gadgets applied on the farm can really reduce the water consumption and your water bill drastically, because there's hardly any wastage when you come to the pig and the rabbit valve and the bird nipple as well. Now, the trough is a good system, and well, the bucket, I think we could do a little bit better than that. But if that's all we have, sure, we have to use what we have. Next slide. So there are many different methods of irrigation and watering plants and so on. And we don't have the luxury of a place like, say, Canada, for example. Canada have vast freshwater resources. And so they've got some huge fields too, for miles and miles, acres and well, hectares and hectares. And so a lot of times they have a flood methods where they just open all these valves and flood the cornfields because water is not an issue for them. All right? And then they turn the valves off and the plants feed as they like. But you could imagine a lot of water is wasted that way through evaporation, and then you're watering areas where you really don't need to water. But like I say, they have vast amount of fresh water. I mean, what comes down the Niagara Falls in 1 minute is more than the consumption of St. Kitts Nevis for a whole year. So water is not a problem there. But where water, in our context in St. Kitts and Nevis, water is a real issue, and we have to be mindful of that. So drip irrigation is more efficient than overhead watering. I'm just trying to compare to the two types of watering methods that are most commonly used here. Overhead is either with a hose, a sprinkler, or the watering can or something like that. So the drip irrigation is more efficient than overhead watering because you can target the root areas at each plant instead of watering an empty space in between rows and in between the plants. And what that does as well is that it minimizes the amount of weeds that you would have to contend with, because if you're not watering an area, unless rain comes, that area doesn't get watered. And therefore, the growth of weeds are minimized, are kept to a minimum. Drip irrigation does not spread diseases like overhead watering because it targets the soil only where the plant root is. Usually what happens is that when you water from overhead using a hose, a sprinkler, a watering can, or something of that sort, you leave, the leaves are left wet. And that wetness really attracts bacteria and fungal growth. Now, drip irrigation is a slow process of watering. So the water goes deep, slowly and deep down into the root zone. Overhead watering, on the other hand, rushes away from the soil, especially if the soil gets dry. It gets dry, it's almost like a drain, it just bounces and run right off. And so you have shallow watering. Let me take you back to my own experience in 2010 when I started in the backyard. We had a whole tray of 72 tomato seedlings. And they were nice and big, but I realized that the first set of fruits, what was happening is that the bottom of them were turning black. And I couldn't understand because every morning we were out there with the hose and we had these fancy spurs on the end of the hose. And sometimes we, in the backyard and you tend to play a little bit with the nozzle to see how far a plant you could reach and so on. And sometimes you try to mimic the rain, turn it upside down and all manner of evil. But what was happening, although we were watering twice per day, most of the water was running off. And so it wasn't penetrating and getting to the root surface. And being the novice that I was at the time, I got the agriculture department involved. And the first thing they said to me was that I need to water more. The plants are lacking water, and that's a symptom of lack of water. I said, no, it can't be, because I water in the morning, and then I water in the evening. But the water wasn't getting to the root zone like it should, because most of that water was running off because we were using the wrong method of watering. From the time I switched over to drip irrigation, problem solved. Problem solved. Tomatoes got bigger, no blemishes, and so on. Now, with everything there, sometimes is a disadvantage. And the only disadvantage I could bring to the fore for using drip irrigation is drip irrigation depends on the magnitude of it. It's sometimes expensive, and sometimes it's a little bit complicated to set up, especially if you're not accustomed to it, or you're not technically inclined. So that is a little drawback about the drip irrigation. The other thing is sometimes it's not readily available either because, as you know, we have to import everything here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Having said all of that, those drip irrigation and supplies and all of that is now more accessible because A1 farms have them on a regular basis. So that's a plus. Now, wrap your minds around the different methods of watering. When we get into the discussion, we could talk a little bit more about the different methods of watering and drip irrigation and so on. Next slide, Caitlin. This session would not be complete in my mind if we didn't spend some time and talk about water conservation methods. Water harvesting, we say harvesting, but correct terminology. But water collection, rainwater collection is imperative for everybody. And I think the earlier drought this year in 2023 and the problems that we had or still have in St. Kitts and Nevis with water is evidence that we have to collect rainwater. We have to harvest rainwater. We've got to use proper irrigation practices. We just mentioned drip irrigation, paramount. No matter how small a space is, whether it would be a complete drip system or a makeshift drip system with the water bottles with the micro holes in them, whatever works. Okay, whatever works. But this overhead watering and stuff like that just doesn't work in my mind. Yes, you may still do it, but be mindful that there's a better way. We got to avoid the wastage. And watering early in the morning and late in the evening. Some of the the good practices that you can do, because early in the morning, the sun is not out and the water would penetrate the ground much easier and get to the root zone. So by the time the sun comes up, the plant is already pulling the water. The water is already to the plant root, and the plant will just uptake the water. In the evening time, the place is cool, so we avoid the evaporation as well. The only thing, and a footnote here, is that watering in the evening, if you're not watering straight to the root zone, could be a little problematic in terms of you would be leaving the leaves wet and you'd be susceptible to bacteria and fungi growth. Mulching, we mentioned mulching last class, whether it be organic mulch or plastic mulch or the black matting. That mulch would help to keep the moisture in the soil as well, so you would use less water. Sometimes we could make ponds to help collect the water. Watershed management, we should, well, let me back up here a little bit, because one of the things that I realized since I got into agriculture on a full-time basis is that some of the ponds that I used to see as a small boy growing up in Gingerland are now filled up with soil and stone and so on over time. And it's a real shame, because I don't think the people in question really understood what they were doing, damaging the whole ecosystem, because those were lifelines for a lot of reptiles and so on, a lot of frogs and lizards and animals. Even birds used to go to these ponds and get water to drink and so on. So sometimes we do things inadvertently and really don't understand what we're doing. But like me, sometimes we don't pay attention until we get into the field and start to look at the areas that it really affects us as well. Next slide. On our farm, the drip irrigation, yes, forgive me, but I got to drive it home. Water is delivered directly to the plant root for a specific period of time at a specific rate. If you've got a good drip irrigation system in place, that would come with a timer, and I really don't have one here with me this evening, but once we do the farm visit, I'll point all of that out. Some of us are familiar with them already. And so you could set your time and interval for the drip system to come on, maybe 8 o'clock in the morning for 3 minutes, 10 o'clock for 5 minutes, 12 o'clock for 3 minutes, and so on. So you could control the amount of water the plant get, and you could deliver the water right to the plant root. Let me say here as well, is that the source, the water source, you could set it in such a way that your fertilizer is incorporated in the drip system. All right, we will demonstrate that once we do the field trip and the hands-on. Hydroponics. Hydroponics, simply put, is growing in a soilless medium. So basically what happens is that the water and the nutrients is recycled time and time again, so that hardly any wastage happens. The water runs down, very, very slow. The plants absorb whatever water and nutrients they need, and the water keep going, and then it's pumped back up to the top, and it goes around and around again. So that's a good way of water conservation as well. Now, this is something we all can do. We all have kitchen sinks and the water from the washing machine and the bathrooms. Yes, it's not good for drinking, but the plants would be happy for it. Especially banana trees, cane, coconut trees. If we're in a situation where we could lead the drain to these trees, we'll be doing ourselves and plants a big favor at our various houses. Now, what we can also do in our own homes and farms is repair leaks as soon as they present themselves. You'd be very surprised that one drop of water constantly would fill a 5-gallon bucket overnight. So imagine that you're wasting 5 gallons of water. Well, day and night anyway. So that's 10 gallons of water per day. That's a lot of water. When you add that up over a month, 10 times 30 is 300 gallons of water. All right? And so, yes, it's paramount that we repair these water leaks as soon as they present themselves. Harvesting water, collecting rainwater, that is a must. Years ago, I know the building code here in Nevis, I don't think it was ever implemented in St. Kitts. It was mandatory that once you're building a house, you must have some kind of water catchment, a system. And we're seeing now and hearing talk that they might be reverting to that. Yes, it's an added expense up front, but I believe it pays for itself over time very, very easily. Years ago when I was building my house here, I decided to go that route and to build a big system. The whole of my front porch is system. So it's about 35 feet long by 10 feet wide by 9 feet deep. So we're talking 10 by 35 is 350. 350. That system can hold over 30,000 gallons of water. Now, I really didn't have agriculture in my mind at the time, but it has served itself well and paid for itself 10 times over because I use the same cistern water now to water the plants. And we all know and could attest to there's no water that is good for plants like rainwater. That is the key. That rainwater is basically almost pure and the plants just gravitate to it. You know, rainfall and the plants just, it's like everything just changes. Like the whole atmosphere around the plant structure, the plant just smiles at you. Now you water it every day using the tap water and it just survives. So yes, the water harvesting, collecting the rainwater is very, very important. So the other thing that is a little bit more expensive and sometimes this may appeal to the agriculture department or the government to build some water catchments because these catchments may be better suited for the guts and so on. So you trap the water when it's coming down. And there's a good example of a water catchment. I know it there from the time I was growing up till now. At Old Manor Hotel in Gingerland, they were raising cows and they still do. And there's a big water catchment right in the mouth of the gut. They just widen it and make it deep. And they really never had to bring water in to supply those cows since I know myself. So yeah, that is another conservation method. Next slide. I kind of like this. And I think this drives the sustainable water management home very, very nicely. First, we start at the top and next time we go on, we buy appliances, whether it be a washing machine or whatever it is. Even, let me digress a little bit, even a refrigerator, we need to start to buy energy efficient appliances. For all purposes now, we're talking about water efficient appliances, dishwashers, washing machines, etc. Household behavior, we've got to change that as well. My son pulled me up the other day because I was brushing my teeth and the water was running. He said, "Daddy, you can't preach one thing and do the next, so turn off the water." I said, all right, thank you. The building, we have to be cognizant of the fact that, yes, we've got to design our buildings, our homes, our industries with space to capture water. Yes, I've got it in red because it's very, very important, water harvesting. And if you hear me say it about 10 more times, it is that important. We have to start to collect rainwater, make a conscious effort to collect rainwater. It could be one of those drums that bring in the food from the States. I know they're not as plentiful now as before because, trust me, sometimes I think that we're better off here than most of them in the States anyway. But the point is that the water barrels have their uses, so don't throw them away. You could start to even put a cotton cloth over them, cover them, and start to collect water, even for drinking purposes. Cuts back a lot on the water bill. Recycle water. We mentioned that before. We recycle the water, and then we use that same water to water the garden and our trees and so on. I won't encourage using that water on your vegetables, but definitely for your fruit trees, like your breadfruit tree, your cane, your banana, etc. The fact is we have to pipe water from place to place because sometimes we have these mass storage tanks. And so we need to get water from there to the people wherever they're located. The wastewater, piping it to a treatment plant, that is more for commercial purposes, but I just wanted to put it in there so that we could all understand there's a need to treat the water and reuse it. Now, this is a little bit more controversial, but I think that we take water for granted and we just waste water. And putting it bluntly, waste water because we really don't feel it in our back pockets. Remember, I started in saying that water is free. If we really had to pay for water, just like how we pay for electricity, I think that we would conserve and appreciate the need to conserve water. All right? So I thought I should have put that in there so that we could have an appreciation of a sustainable management tool for water. Next slide. Now, I put water harvesting in red because I really feel to my heart that it's very, very important for each and every one of us to play a part when it comes to water harvesting, water collection, whatever term we want to use. It's also very important to be able to store the water that we harvest. And yes, I know it may come with a cost because if the collection tank that we collect the water in is full and we don't have some place to store it, it just overflows and then we're really defeating the purpose. All right, so sometimes in some instances we need 2 tanks, but at least 1 for starters. Water has become a very scarce resource and therefore harvesting water has become an essential part of our daily lives. And it should be. It allows us a sense of security. Once you have water, you really aren't up a gum tree if the water department decide to shut their water off. And I will tell you, I've got a big cistern. I don't even know if water goes off or comes on because I've set it up in such a way that it switches over automatically anyway. The only way I would know is if I hear the pump kicks in, you know? So you could set yourself and set up your house and set up your farm in such a way that you harvest the water and you store the water. You could store it until whenever you need it. So water harvesting is a sustainable water management practice that can be employed by anyone in many different levels, from a simple rain barrel, and I call it a rain barrel, but might be a food barrel. Make sure it's food grade. To a comprehensive system that is integrated with irrigation system or household plumbing, ties right into your household plumbing, so that if water goes, you really don't know, you really don't care too much. Did I say that? No, I didn't say that. Population increase is definitely proportional to the water demand. Therefore, water harvesting is critical for humans. You hear that term again? Water harvesting, water collection is critical for humans, crops and livestock, health and survival. Harvesting and using rainwater, and I had to put this in, can reduce or in some cases eliminate the small water bill that you have. I'm for one who believe that if the water had was costing you more, you would treat it with a little bit more respect, for want of words. Next slide, Keith. Okay, now for the interesting part. Let's look at some of the ways to harvest the water. This is the food grade water barrel that I was alluding to earlier. And luckily for us, it's very easy to set up. There's already 2 holes at the top. You just need to put in a water tap at the bottom and make sure it's on a level surface. Connect it up to your roof and you're ready to go. Only thing I would say, make sure it's securely covered, because we've got lots of frogs and some people are very scared of them. I mean, the frogs will keep your water clean if you ask me. But a lot of us, once we see frogs, we want to go even close to the barrel. But the frogs are doing their jobs. They're keeping the flies and the spiders and everything else at bay. All right, so we spoke about the ecosystem. Those are part of the ecosystem. So using rainwater barrels to collect rainwater, using a rainwater tap. Some of us don't have on our farms a shed or anything like that. But if we get a plastic or vinyl tarpaulin, we could position it in such a way and then have some kind of catchment system to the end of it where we bring it together and let it just gravity feed right in there. It's not no rocket science. Using a water system to collect rainwater, using bladders, water tanks, and I've seen a number of water tanks on farms and they're getting more and more common. And I think that is a good thing, so that people are now getting the message of collecting the rainwater. I had the privilege 2 months ago of supplying the New River Farmers Association, the New River Farmers Association with 21,000 gallon tanks. And I think that was a good initiative on their part. I think that was financed by the Green Climate Fund. So kudos to the management and the people who put that project together. I think more of that is needed within St. Kitts and Nevis. I know in St. Kitts, they had a distribution of 1,000 gallon tanks at one time. That was last year. I think they had another one earlier this year in St. Kitts as well, to a lot of their farmers. I saw some footage and was involved in one of that, so I could speak from that. But there's a need for a lot more to be done in terms of water harvesting. Collecting rainwater with plastic pond. We all see these little, what should I call them? Almost like swimming pools that the kids use, something similar to that, but they've got some pond liners that can be used to collect rainwater as well. Next slide, Caitlin, because I'm mindful that we have to spend some time chatting. So storage system to support efficient drip irrigation and just general watering of the farm. These pictures are complements A1 farms. You would see on the left the guttering from the greenhouse, and then on the right some 1,000-gallon tanks that is used to collect and store the rainwater. Next slide. These are just some of the large tanks that are erected throughout the island. I see one or two of them in St. Kitts as well. And let's go back. Remember, I said we have to take the water, and that is part of the water management. Take the water from one place to another. And so the water is stored in these great big tanks, and then they're piped and distributed without interfering with the ecosystem, causing any harm or damage to humans, property, and animals. Next slide. So let me sum it up this way. The earth is loaded with water, but remember, there's only 3% of it that is fresh water. And if you could recall, only 1% of that fresh water is available for human consumption. The effects of climate change is causing longer drought periods and hotter temperatures, and really creating water shortages in St. Kitts and Nevis. Therefore, we must find effective and efficient ways to harvest water, to collect our water, and manage this resource in a sustainable way if we are to have adequate supply of fresh water in the future. We realize that fresh water is a must for good produce and the sustenance of human and animal life. So there you had it, guys. Thank you. Next slide. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. Sorry for rushing you through the end, but I wanted to make sure that I leave enough time for us to have a good conversation about water, water conservation. What do you do in your own homes and backyards and on your own little farms? So I wish I could tell you take 2 minutes break right now, but we are almost there. So let's delve right into it. And Keaton, if you could be so kind as to moderate the rest of the session for me, I'd be really appreciative of that.
Absolutely, not a problem. And thank you, Maki, as well, for what I think is a really well-rounded presentation on water management. I think you went from the elements to what we need to do in our day-to-day. So ladies, this is your time really to shine, to ask your questions, to ask your concerns, to even make observations perhaps. So as I've mentioned, wow, see, love this group. We already have three ladies, so we will go to the three ladies, and then if you also are a bit timid and you want to put your questions in the chat as well, feel free. I will also moderate questions in the chat. So we will go to Abigail, then Nelisa, and then Indira. Abigail, you can go ahead.
Hi, good night, everyone. In terms of using the food barrel or maybe the water tank system for harvesting and storing the water, is there any need in the future for treating the water? Is there any need, like, would the containers go mass or anything to that effect?
Well, yeah, good question. I really haven't seen. The thing is, let me put it this way. The dark colored barrels, like the blue barrels and the black water tanks, really don't grow algae in a quick time. The lighter the tank, if you have a white tank, because of the intrusion of the sunlight, that would attract and have algae to grow. So in my experience, there's really nothing to worry too much about in terms of algae in these darker tanks. But there's no harm in cleaning the tanks after a year or two. None at all. But in terms of the black tanks, um, I would have to clean the ones on the farm, but not because of algae, because of the dust particles and so on that would settle on the roof over time and then find their way into the tank itself. And sometimes I would clean them to prevent the drip lines from being clogged or exposed to that kind of stuff, although we have filters on them. Yeah, so there you go.
Thank you. So we move on to Nelisa. You can go ahead.
Good evening. Okay, so I remember you were saying that the drip irrigation is best. However, I use a bottle of water to water my plants. I try to stay close to the, let's say, the soil surface. As I mentioned last time, I do the containers. So I'm thinking when it comes to trying to conserve water, in the back of my mind, what I've been doing is, okay, I want to make sure I water them enough so I don't tend to stop until I see them seeping out at the bottom. But what would you suggest in the sense that this is what I have to deal with and I don't seem to see any other alternative in terms of watering them because of the fact that they're not in the ground but in containers?
All right. That in itself, Melissa, is drip irrigation, because you have your bottles with water and you have some pinholes in the bottles. I would assume you just rest the bottles in the pots and leave them there to drip. And if that's not what you're doing, that is what you should be doing. Just a pinhole so that it just drip drop by drop by drop. You don't want it to come out too fast. So the bottle idea is a very good one. But the methodology might need a little tuning if you're not doing it the way I just said. Just a pinhole in the bottle so that it drips and not runs. All right, and you could leave it there and go to work and come back and it might still having some water because the plant doesn't use all that water if it's gonna seep out and not drip. Are you with me?
Yeah, so basically what you're saying, if I have, say, one of those small plastic bottles that they tend to use if you're, let's say you go to a luncheon and they have a drink in one of those small plastic bottles, if I have one of those and I
You see
put
this one? You see this one in my hand?
yes.
All right. Just one pinhole in that.
Okay.
Just cover the top and one pinhole in the bottom. Just rest it right in the pot. And so
Mhm.
that it just drips slowly. Just drip, drip, drip. You don't want it to run out. You just want it to drip.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you suggest the same bottle that you have in your hand to pull it up, or would you say halfway? Or it depends on the size of the plant.
Well, it really depends on the size of the plant. So if you're talking a seedling, you probably would just need maybe 1/4 of that bottle. But as the plant grow, you would know when to add some more water.
Okay. Okay, I think I got it now. Thank you.
No problem at all, Melissa.
Great. And we will go to Indira and then to the chat. Go ahead, Indira.
Good night, good evening.
Good evening.
I have never considered pond as a water catchment system, so it was very interesting. Could you expand a little bit more? Can we use that water to water the crops from the pond?
Sure. The pond water is usually very clean water, because a lot of times what happens in the pond is that you have the natural habitat that cleans the water. You have the frogs, you have all of the living organisms, and they keep that water fairly clean. Now, I could tell you how clean the water is because as a small boy growing up, going to the mountains and that, sometimes we just move the leaves and the water is, if you dip that water up in your hand, the water is very, very clear. So it's good to use, especially for the plants. I mean, I wouldn't go back and drink it now unless I'm really desperate. But yes, it's good water for the plants. And you can't beat it because a lot of times it's either from the spring or natural rainwater. And we know how the nutrient content of that rainwater is.
What about
Very good for the
mosquitoes?
plants.
It won't have
Well,
mosquitoes?
yeah, it might have a mosquitoes, but remember it's a catch-22 situation.
Ah,
If mosquitoes are there, frogs are there. So the frogs,
I need the mosquito.
exactly,
Ah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
okay. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, ladies. So we have a few questions in the chat. But again, you feel free to use the raise hand function on the bottom, or if you want to use the chat as well. So Maki, I'm just going to go through what some persons have mentioned. Antoinette Evelyn, I've seen someone use terracotta spikes on top of wine bottles, fill the bottle with water, and attach the spike, turn it upside down into the soil, and that is the watering system.
I've seen that too, and that is excellent thinking. Like I said, whatever works. I've seen some very interesting drip irrigation. I mean, not because it's not commercially made, doesn't mean that it's not a drip system. It might not be an integrated drip system, but once the water drips and goes to the root zone, we have a drip system in place. Whether it's individual or a mass production of a drip system, it really doesn't matter once it works. And especially if you're dealing with a backyard situation, there's really no need to, if you have 20 pots, to go spend all that money to get a proper drip irrigation system in place when you could recycle and reuse some water bottles to great effect. Great effect. The other thing I've seen work is they take the bigger bottles, like the water bottle with the handle, the gallon bottles, cut it in two, turn it upside down, and then put the plant in it with almost like a wick system, like a cotton cloth, down in the water. And then that comes right up into the soil. And it acts like the wick in the lamp, and it just brings the water up to the root zone. And that works perfect. So I've seen some great innovations, and some of them really make me smile, but whatever it is up to your imagination. And yeah, I've seen some good ones. So once the water drips, or in a case like that, I mean, that is almost like hydroponics, you know, but that's the wick system, and that works fine.
Okay, so we will move on. Miss Seldin Kamara mentioned, but actually before that, Julian Nisbet, what water pH is the best for plant growth, and how does the fertilize emitter work, and how often should it be applied?
Okay. Best pH for plants, it really varies. Something like tomato would operate on a pH of 5.8, a little bit on the acidic side. Bell peppers, maybe around 6.2. So you really can't pull a number. You have to know what plant you're using, and then really look up the pH for it. The other question was, the other part to the question.
The other question is, how does the fertilizer emitter work, and how
Oh,
often should it be
okay.
applied?
All right. The emitter, it's really part of the drip system. and maybe I should have explained a little bit more. What happens is that the fertilizer would be mixed with the water, so you have a nutrient solution. And so that nutrient solution goes through the drip system and then via the drip stick right to the plant itself. So it's as if you're sending water, but you're having the nutrients dissolve in the water. So you have a nutrient solution. And so it's not the emitter itself. The emitter allows the flow. It controls the flow. Because the emitter comes in different flow rates. You could have like half a gallon per minute, 3/4 gallon per minute, 1 gallon per, not per minute, per hour, sorry. And so the emitter, all the emitter does is control the flow. The ones with the brown covering, that's half a gallon per hour. Let me see if I find one with black. No, but the one with the black, they're all color coded. The one with the black is like a gallon per hour. So that controls the flow. Now there's a timer that is part of the irrigation system, and that sets the time when the irrigation system would come on. So for example, you might set it to 8 o'clock to come on for 3 minutes. And so it would run for 3 minutes at a rate of a half a gallon per hour, or 1 gallon per hour, depending on which emitter you have in your drip system. Now, the other thing is you will monitor and know over time and watch the stage of the plant to say how long you should irrigate for. So for example, if I'm planting, say, seedlings, lettuce seedlings, I might only irrigate for 2 minutes 3 times a day for the first week. And then I might up it to 4 minutes 4 times a day. And then for the third week in the real growth stage now, you might irrigate for 5 minutes 4 times a day. And so it really depends on the stage of the plant and the nutrient requirement of the plant. All right?
Next question. So we'll take 2 more questions and then Sarah will go to you and we'll go back to the chat. Okay, so next question is from Seldine. What kind of filter would you suggest for a cistern? As we speak about water catchment and changing building norms, we still have plumbers and draftsmen discouraging rainwater, stating there's Sahara dust, microacids, and such in the rainwater. They're suggesting using the water from the main, in essence, defeating the purpose to an extent. That's a great question.
Yeah, very. But there's nothing that can beat the rainwater, and the plants are testimony to that. Even if you have a good drink of rainwater, it's totally different to any water that you get from one of these water places. So I swear by the natural rainwater. Now, on the farm, we use what we call a 50 mesh filter. The one for the house, I really can't remember off the top of my head what it is. But these are very reputable. They come from very reputable companies like GE. And once you change your filter twice a year, you have no problems at all. Now, what we have to realize as well, with the public water going through your piping system, you see how quick calcium build up around your taps, in your pipes, and so on. You send rainwater through that for 2 years and you see nothing at all of that sort. So I really don't understand why the builders would be shying away from having people using and harvesting rainwater at all. I cannot subscribe to that one at all. Just don't make any sense. Yeah. I mean, if you do it properly, you may end up with a zero water bill. Because if you get rain on a regular basis and you have a decent sized water catchment and you have a good filtering system, then hey, you got a win-win situation, because the water from your roof is good drinking water. So you really don't even have to buy water. And to the point where it says the water has in Saharan dust. Those dust particles cannot pass through those filters. No way at all, at all, at all. Yeah. And keep it even so. Even if you don't drink your rainwater, then you don't have to pay for it. Because I'm sure that most people don't even drink the tap water either. The tap water is full of chlorine and so on. So no, I can't subscribe to his line of argument at all, at all, at all.
Okay, next we will go to Suzette. Do you put, going back to a previous question, do you put the bottle cork into a hole next to the plant or just rest it on the surface of the soil next to the plant?
Yeah, you just rest it next to the surface, next to the plant. One thing with water would find its way. So you really don't have to worry too much about, resting it 1 inch, 2 inches. Once it's within good proximity, then we're good to go. Yeah, water have a way of finding its own path.
Great. So we will go to Sarah, who's raised her hand. You can go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, good night.
Good
I was
night.
just curious if you have any experience, or if anyone here has any experience with a method where you bury an unglazed terracotta.
Sorry, say again. I didn't get that, Caitlin.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Hi, Sarah.
She's dropping out.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I don't understand what happened. I was curious if you have any experience with a system where you bury a terracotta, an unglazed clay terracotta pot, or like you glue 2 flower pots together that are unglazed, and you fill that and it seeps into the soil. You bury it up to like the opening, and it's supposed to be like drip irrigation, but rather than dripping, it's actually buried into the soil, like if you're doing a raised bed or something.
Yeah, I've seen that. They've used clay pots.
Yes.
And yeah. And what it does, it just allow a little seepage, but very, 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 very slow. Yeah, that's a good method as well.
Okay,
Yeah, that's a good method as well.
thank you. Because I don't know anyone who's, I have no like firsthand knowledge of it, so I wanted to, I needed
Yeah.
someone to confirm that it's good.
Oh yeah, no,
Thank
it works. It really works. Yeah. Seen them do it with the clay pots that they make at the pottery. Yeah. Lots of homemade innovations that really works.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. I don't know if you remembered, Maki, from our last cohort, there was one of our participants who had actually made an at-home desalination.
Yeah. Yeah, lady from Bird Rock.
Right. It's quite
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the questions are coming in fast and furious. Bronte, with reference to drip irrigation and using drip emitters, which method is better to use to avoid blockage when fertilizing?
No, method in terms of, you see, what happens here is that the fertilizer that most drip irrigation uses is a granular fertilizer that is soluble. So you would dissolve it in the water, completely dissolve it in the water. Then from the water, from the tank, you've got these filters in the line, so they won't allow any particles to pass through the drip irrigation lines. They would filter up most of that. Now and again, you might have a little residue that passes through there. But if you use good quality emitters, you really don't have that problem at all. Now, I don't have any of the old ones, but when I say old, prior to 3 years ago, I was using a different drip peg, and it had some filters at the end or at the beginning of the peg. And those filters used to get clogged with the calcium deposits over time. So I've reverted to these open drip pegs, and the water just runs down and goes straight to the plant. But once the fertilizer is dissolved and you've got a good filter system in place, you really shouldn't have issues with blockage. One of the other things that we've done at A1 Farms is that we bleed our lines every Monday morning, just as a preventative measure. So what we will do is, if this is the end of the line, we will just open the line and let the just let water flush out the line, just to get rid of any calcium buildup or anything like that that may find itself lodged in the line over the week. But usually, once we do that on a regular basis, we hardly see anything. And so we really don't have that problem of blockage. Blockage comes especially when you don't have filters in your system. So the filtering on both sides, on the suction side and on the distribution side of the drip line, is very paramount, very important. So try those things and you should be fine.
Thanks, Maki. I noticed there's a bit of interest in hydroponics and so forth, and our next question is, one of the next questions is on hydroponics. Just to let you know, ladies, about 2-3 years ago, we had a very basic program on hydroponics. So I'd be happy to send the link to you. I believe it's on our YouTube or Facebook channel, so I will send that over to you guys so that you can have access to those videos as well for those who are interested. Okay, so we're moving on next to Darian. Would we be shown the basic drip irrigation setup, please?
Oh yes, that is part of the field trip. The water harvesting, the drip irrigation, the timers, all of that would be pointed out, so you have a first-hand feel and knowledge of exactly how it's done. Take as many pictures as possible and ask as many questions as you can. And that's why the practical session is so important, so that you could tie all the classroom material. I try to make it as interactive as possible so that, it all comes together. But bear in mind, there's no one way of doing things. There's always a little variation here and a little variation there. Usually is what works best for you in your particular environment. Speaking about hydroponics, there would be a session on protected agriculture, and I would spend some time keeping on hydroponics, because I think a lot of us, especially ladies, are very interested in the hydroponics aspect of farming, and it is a good technique. And I must admit, ladies are more meticulous than men and pay attention to detail. So sometimes they thrive and excel better in the hydroponics area. It's not as manual intensive either. So it's right up the alley. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's a good area.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll take the last two questions from Abigail and then Dawn. Abigail, you mentioned hydroponics as a means of water conservation. I'm very much interested in hydroponics and have done a little bit of research. Do you know of any government/non-government initiatives geared towards that field?
Not really. What I can say is that once it's agriculture, there are incentives as it relates to importation of material, because unless you're gonna make up the systems yourself, which would be a little bit challenging if you have no experience, you would have to import everything. Now, what ensues in the agriculture department in St. Kitts and Nevis is that there's no import duty and there's no value-added tax on supplies. So you'd bring in your fertilizer, you'd bring in your hydroponic systems, and you would get exempted from the duty and from the VAT. What you'd have to pay is just a 6% custom service charge on the CIF, which is the cost, insurance, and freight of the goods. So that is the only initiative that I know. I know some time ago, CFBC was running a course on hydroponics. I'm not quite sure if they offer it in the evening or it was part of the curriculum, but I could definitely check that out, Keithlin, and shed some light on it for the next session.
Absolutely, sounds good. And finally, from Dawn, what is the best fertilizer to use with the drip system? You mentioned already, Maki, some of the soluble fertilizers. Perhaps maybe you have examples.
Yeah, must be soluble. And there's a company called Peters that makes a very good complete mix. It is what we call a 20-20-20. And when you talk about fertilizer, back up a little bit, and you've got three main numbers on the bag. And usually those are your macronutrients. So you would have your nitrogen, and you would have your potassium, and you would have your phosphorus. So you'd have N for nitrogen, P for phosphorus, and K. Those are the chemical symbols for these nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So the 20-20-20 is a complete mix. So it's in equal portions as it relates to nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, apart from that, you would need micronutrients as well. And this complete mix has all the micronutrients needed to make it a good fertilizer. So apart from the NPK, which is your nitrogen, phosphorus, and your potassium, you would have your micronutrients like zinc, calcium, boron, and so on. All of those would be part of that mix. So what happens here is that it really depends on the crop you're growing. But let me use lettuce for an example. For lettuce, you would use about 4 pounds of that complete mix to 1,000 gallons. All right, so you would dilute, and you could mix it in a 5-gallon bucket just to dissolve it, and then throw that mixture into the tank with 1,000 gallons. So you could hardly see any trace of that fertilizer once it's in there. That is how good the fertilizer is. So you really don't want a lot of it per 1,000 gallons. So if you're using smaller ratios of water, say 50 gallons, you just do the math and you just break it down to how much ounces you're gonna need per 50 gallons. volume of water. So the Peters is what I've been using. I've been using another one before that with great success as well, but the name is just eluding me. But it's also a 20-20 mix, complete mixed fertilizer with the micro and the macronutrients, because those are very important. Your iron, your boron, your zinc, your copper, and all of that. That's in there. Now, if you're planting in soil like I am, I plant in soil and the soil is in pots. Then if your fertilizer mix is a little bit off, it's really not a big deal because the soil is very forgiving, and it compensates for any little mishaps in the mix of the fertilizer. If you're doing hydroponics now, on the other hand, it's a little bit more challenging or peculiar. You would have to make sure that your ratios are right on, your pH levels are right on, and your EC levels are right on. Right? So when we get to hydroponics, I'll try and spend a little bit more time on the actual pHs and the ECs and so on. But planting in soil is a lot more forgiving than just using a nutrient solution. You have to be on the button for the nutrient solution. The other little thing about the nutrient solution is that it's recycled, such that every now and again you would have to check it and do the adjustment and have some kind of backup electricity system in place just in case you have an extended power failure. When I say extended, I'm not talking 5-10 minutes, I'm talking maybe half a day. Otherwise, then the plants start to react and had to come back and so on. Right? But I really love hydroponics myself. It's just that it's easier for me when I'm away from the farm to be in soil, because if there's something that is off, then the soil corrects 99% of the time. And so I really don't have to have that added stress. But if it's close to you at home and so on, yes. And it's a real preference. It's a cleaner environment for sure. And you get good results as well. A little bit more expensive to set up initially, but the cost, the return on your investment is pretty good as well. So yeah, I would go hydroponics tomorrow if I could afford it. Next question.
I think that's actually all the questions for this evening.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Maki, for such an amazing session. So ladies, just a few housekeeping rules. Maki, also, just so you know, Maki's PowerPoint presentations are already available on the Google Drive. I've sent in the link in the chat. Also, the Tuesday's recording is available on YouTube. We will be uploading tonight's session. Hopefully by tomorrow it should be available on YouTube, and the link is sent. Finally, ladies, just as a reminder, you are using the same Zoom link to connect to your classes. It's not a different Zoom link. And the Zoom link can be found in your introductory email. You can also click the group info on WhatsApp and you will find the Zoom link. You will also find the Google Drive link as well for all the resources going forward. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Caitlin, sorry. Just before you go, I just looked at the chat and someone was asking about exemption for leather. Once manufacturing and agriculture, I know that there's exemption from the import duties and the value added tax. You just have to apply to the Ministry of Finance. First of all, you need to get the approval from the Agriculture Department, and you should be good to go. Manufacturing, you might have to go to a different Ministry of Commerce for that exemption, but that should be exempted as well. Manufacturing and agriculture and and so on are exempted. So yes, please apply for any exemption and you should be fine. Thanks a lot, guys. And it was time well spent. I could feel the energy. So thank you for being here and I look forward to see you next week.
Thank you so much, Maki. Before, well, you go, I saw somebody who wanted to be added to the WhatsApp chat. So I'm just going to quickly send the invite code. So guys, just check it out in the chat right now. You can click that link and then you'll be added to WhatsApp. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening and take care. See you next Tuesday. Enjoy the weekend.
Bye, guys. Peace
Bye-bye.
out. Bye.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye. Night, night.
Night, night. Bye-bye. To all my sisters.